I just wanted to help my adopted son go trick-or-treating on Halloween, but when the door creaked open, I lost my breath because standing there was my high school crush, and now he was a single dad. I never thought I'd wear that ridiculous pumpkin costume again. It had been 10 years since the last time I squeezed into it for a neighborhood Halloween party. Back then, I was 28, carefree, and still holding on to the belief that love was something that might just stumble into your life like a movie scene. But now, I was 38, with a quiet house and a 10-year-old boy who'd lost more than any child should. Dad, I don't think I can go alone, Max said softly, his voice trembling just enough for me to hear the fear behind it. He stood in the doorway, clutching the handle of his candy bucket like it was a lifeline. The cheap plastic jack-o'-lantern glowed faintly from the light inside the house. His eyes, big, brown, and shy, lifted to meet mine. Can you come with me? Just this time? I had promised myself I'd let him grow confidence on his own. But how could I say no? He'd already lost both his parents in that awful car accident a year ago. Every small moment of fear, he admitted, felt like a quiet invitation, a way to say, I still need you. So I smiled, ruffling his hair. All right, buddy, give me a few minutes. I think I've got something that'll scare the ghosts away. He tilted his head, curious. What do you mean? You'll see. Digging through the storage room felt like flipping through an old diary. Boxes labeled college stuff and old memories stacked higher than my head. I coughed at the dust, but when I found the orange fabric tucked at the bottom, I couldn't help but laugh. The old pumpkin costume. Bright, bulbous, ridiculous, and oddly comforting. When I put it on, the mirror reflected a man who looked like he'd been through hell and still managed to smile. The costume didn't fit perfectly anymore. A little tighter around the stomach, a little looser at the arms. But it worked. When I stepped out, Max's eyes widened. You're really going to wear that? Of course, I said proudly. The Pumpkin King is back. He giggled, covering his mouth. It was the first time I'd heard that sound all week. That alone made every bit of embarrassment worth it. The night air was crisp, one of those rare evenings in our small town where the stars seemed to listen. Kids ran along the sidewalks, laughter echoing. Jack-o'-lanterns flickered on porches, and the smell of caramel apples filled the wind. Max held onto my hand as we walked from house to house, his shyness slowly melting away with each piece of candy. His smile grew wider every time someone complimented his vampire cape. We'd almost finished the street when Max tugged my sleeve. Dad, that one. He pointed to a house a bit farther down the road, one I didn't remember being there before. The porch light was dim, and a single carved pumpkin sat by the steps, flickering faintly. Are you sure? I asked. It looks kind of quiet. He nodded, clutching his bucket. Maybe they have big candy. I chuckled. All right, let's find out. The gravel crunched under our shoes as we walked up the path. The air around the house felt different, not spooky, exactly, just still. I knocked gently on the door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the door opened with a soft creak, and there he was, standing in a faded tank top and jeans. Was a face I hadn't seen in nearly 20 years. Charles Bennett. He looked older, of course, faint lines at the corners of his eyes, a few strands of silver in his dark hair, but he was more muscular now, and that same gentle warmth was still there, just like it was back in high school. John? His voice was low, uncertain, but full of recognition. I froze. My heart did that thing it used to do when he walked into class late and flashed that lazy half-smile. Charles, I said, barely above a whisper. Wow, I didn't know you moved back here. He laughed softly, a little awkward, scratching the back of his neck. Just did. A few months ago. The house still needs a lot of work. I didn't expect to see you like this, though. He gestured at my costume, smirking. Pumpkin King, huh? Max peeked from behind me, whispering, Dad, do you know him? Yeah, I said, my chest tightening with nostalgia. We went to school together. Charles was an old friend. Charles smiled at Max. Hi there, little man. You must be the bravest vampire in town. Max grinned shyly. He's my dad, he said proudly, clutching my arm. That word dad still hit me differently every time. Charles's eyes softened when he heard it. Well, Charles said, opening the door wider, why don't you come in for a bit? I've got hot chocolate on the stove. It's not exactly Halloween candy, but it's better than being out in the cold. I hesitated for a second, but then Max looked up at me with hopeful eyes. Can we? He asked. And before I could think of a reason to say no, I nodded. Inside, the house was warm and smelled faintly of cinnamon. Boxes were still stacked along the walls, a few half open. A framed picture of a young boy sat on the mantel. "That's my son," Charles said, noticing me looking. "Daniel, he's 7. He's out with a friend tonight." He poured hot chocolate into 2 mugs and 1 small cup for Max. We sat by the small kitchen table, and for a moment it felt like the past had folded into the present, the same boyish glances, the same quiet comfort. "It's been a long time," I said softly. "Too long," he replied. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again after graduation." Graduation. The word itself stirred something deep a memory I hadn't thought about in years. The night after the party, behind the bleachers, when the music had faded and everyone was too drunk or too happy to notice us slipping away. The way he'd looked at me, eyes filled with something he couldn't name. The way he'd leaned in, almost close enough to kiss, before whispering, "I can't." "Not now." And then he was gone. "I remember," I said, forcing a small smile. "You ran off before I could say anything." He looked down, rubbing his thumb along the edge of his mug. "Yeah, I was scared. I didn't know who I was back then." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was delicate, like a bridge between 2 timelines. Max was sipping his cocoa quietly, his feet swinging under the chair. He looked between us, maybe sensing something but too young to understand. "So," I said after a while, "you've got a son. That's amazing." Charles nodded. "Yeah, he's a good kid. His mom and I, well, we divorced a few months ago. It's been rough, but Daniel's adjusting." "I get that," I said. "Max is my adopted son. He lost his parents last year. It's been a journey." Charles's eyes softened. "You're doing a good thing, John. He's lucky to have you." For a moment, our eyes met, really met. That kind of quiet recognition only 2 people who've known pain can share. And then Max yawned, rubbing his eyes. "I think someone's had enough candy for one night," I said, smiling. "We should get going." Charles stood and walked us to the door. "Hey, maybe we can catch up sometime. The kids could meet. Daniel's starting school next week." "I'd like that," I said honestly. He smiled, the same way he did when we were 17 and hiding behind locker doors. "It's good to see you again, John." "You too, Charles." As we walked back down the quiet path, I glanced over my shoulder once. He was still standing at the door, watching us go, one hand in his pocket, a faint smile on his lips. And for the first time in years, Halloween didn't feel lonely anymore. A few nights after Halloween, it rained. Not the heavy kind, just a soft drizzle that left the air smelling like wet leaves and time passing. I was folding laundry when I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, there he was again. Charles, this time without the surprise, but with something quieter in his eyes, like an invitation. "Hey?" he said, smiling. "I made too much dinner. Thought you and Max might like some." He held up a covered dish that smelled suspiciously like baked lasagna. I chuckled. "You remember my weakness for pasta, huh?" "I remember a lot of things," he said, then glanced down shyly. "Anyway, come by if you're free. Daniel's been asking about Max since I told him I met you both. Said he wants to meet the vampire kid." That made me laugh. "All right, we'll come by after Max finishes his homework." Charles's house looked different at night, warmer somehow. Candles glowed softly on the dining table, and a faint song played from a small speaker, something from the early 2000s that pulled me straight back to high school memories. Daniel was already sitting at the table when we walked in, a cheerful boy with dark curls and curious eyes. "So you're the pumpkin man," he said, grinning at me. "That's me," I replied. "And you must be the brave explorer who convinced your dad to hand out hot chocolate instead of candy." He laughed. "Candy's too easy. Hot chocolate is classier." Charles rolled his eyes. He got that word from TV. The boys clicked faster than I expected. Within minutes, they were talking about their favorite video games and trading candy. Watching them, I felt a strange comfort I hadn't felt in a while. The kind of peace that sneaks up on you when life momentarily feels right. Charles caught me smiling and raised his glass of red wine slightly. "Two old friends," he said softly. I clinked my glass against his. "To second chances." We talked for hours after the boys went to the living room to watch a movie. The rain outside turned into a steady rhythm against the windows, wrapping the house in a cocoon of quiet. "So," I said, leaning back, "you really just moved here a few months ago?" "Yeah," he replied, stirring his drink absent-mindedly. "After the divorce, I needed a place that didn't remind me of what went wrong. Daniel needed a new start too." When I found this house, it just felt peaceful. I nodded. I get that. He looked up at me. What about you? You still doing photography? That caught me off guard. You remember that? Of course I do, he said. You used to carry your camera everywhere, even to chemistry class. I laughed, shaking my head. Yeah, well, it's more of a hobby now. Life got busy. I work at a printing studio in town. It pays the bills. You always had an eye for beauty, he said, his tone softer, even when no one else noticed it. That silence returned the same one that used to hover between us in the hallways when we were 17, both too scared to name what it meant. I looked away, pretending to examine a framed picture on his wall, the old high school yearbook photo of our class. My chest tightened when I saw us both there, frozen in time. You kept that? I asked. He smiled faintly. I didn't have the heart to throw it away, even if I tried. Some things just stay. The way he said it made something flicker inside me, something I thought had gone out years ago. Later, when he went to refill our glasses, I caught sight of the photo beside the kitchen window graduation night. The gym lights behind us, his hand almost touching mine, both of us half smiling like we were caught in the middle of something we didn't yet understand. He noticed me looking when he returned. You remember that night? He asked quietly. Every second, I said, before I could stop myself. He took a slow breath. I was so close to telling you that night. You have no idea. I think I do, I murmured. He chuckled, shaking his head. God, I was terrified. My dad was strict, my friends were idiots, and I didn't even know how to admit it to myself. And now? He hesitated. Now I just wish I hadn't let fear win. For a moment, the world felt still, like we were back under those gym lights again, surrounded by music and what-ifs. Then Max's laughter came from the living room, followed by Daniel's excited voice, breaking the silence. We both smiled. Life, it seemed, knew when to interrupt the moment. When it was time to leave, Charles walked us to the door again. Thanks for dinner, I said. It was really good. Thanks for coming, he replied, rubbing the back of his neck. It's nice having someone around who remembers who I used to be. You're still that person, I said softly. He looked at me for a long moment, long enough for me to feel the weight of every unspoken thing between us. Then he smiled, almost shyly. Good night, John. Good night, Charles. As Max and I stepped into the cold night air, I couldn't help glancing back again. Through the window, I saw Charles watching us go, his son now beside him, waving. For some reason, I waved back longer than I needed to. That night, after I tucked Max into bed, I sat by the window, watching the rain trail down the glass. The street was quiet, except for the faint glow from Charles's porch across the block. It was strange how someone could disappear from your life for years, and then suddenly, with one knock on a door, they were there again, pulling every old feeling to the surface. I thought about that night of our graduation again, how close we'd been, how my heart had raced when he leaned in, how I could still remember the smell of his cologne mixed with the cold air. Maybe fate was funny that way. Maybe it waited for the right time even if it took decades. And maybe, this time, I wouldn't let it slip away. The following week passed in the rhythm of ordinary life morning coffees, work deadlines, packed lunches, and bedtime stories with Max. But underneath that steady pattern, there was something else, a quiet warmth that hadn't been there before. Every time I drove past Charles's house, I found myself slowing down. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of him mowing the lawn, or helping Daniel fix his bike, or waving from his porch. I didn't wave back the first few times. It felt too much like admitting something. But that changed one Friday evening. I'd just finished a long shift at the studio. The sun was setting, the sky fading into streaks of orange and purple. As I turned the corner toward home, I saw Charles outside, sleeves rolled up, covered in dust, cleaning out his garage. Boxes scattered across the driveway, old furniture leaning against the walls. Without thinking, I pulled over. He looked up, squinting a little, then smiled when he recognized me. John, you're just in time for the part where I give up and order pizza. I laughed, stepping out of the car. You need help? I'd never say no to free labor, he joked, tossing me a rag. The garage was like a time capsule, old photo albums, boxes labeled Christmas stuff, and a few trophies from his high school soccer days. Dust hung in the sunlight, swirling like tiny memories that refused to settle. I rolled up my sleeves. So, what's the plan here? Try to make it look like less of a disaster, he said, smiling. Daniel's been nagging me to turn this into a mini gym. Guess he wants to start working out. Like father, like son, I said before realizing the words had slipped out. He paused, then gave a small laugh. You still remember that? I barely made it through tryouts. Are you kidding? You were the reason half the school went to the soccer games. Half the school? Fine. I went to the soccer games, I admitted, grinning. He laughed again, that same easy, boyish sound I hadn't heard in 2 decades. For a moment, it was like no time had passed at all. We worked side by side until dusk deepened into night. When the last box was stacked neatly, Charles dusted his hands off and said, Beer? Only if you've got 2, I replied. He disappeared inside and came back with 2 cold bottles. We sat on the edge of the driveway, the hum of crickets filling the silence. The porch light cast a warm halo around us. Inside, through the open window, I could see Daniel on the couch, watching TV, the flickering light painting him in shades of blue. You did good today, Charles said quietly. Same to you, I said. Garage looks great. Thanks. Feels good to get rid of the clutter. He took a sip, then added, Funny how stuff piles up, isn't it? Things we don't even realize we've been holding on to. I glanced at him. You mean boxes or memories? He smirked, but didn't answer right away. The air felt heavy with all the things we weren't saying. Finally, he spoke. Do you remember that night? After graduation? My heart skipped. Yeah. I still think about it sometimes, he said, staring into his drink. The music, the noise, the way everything felt like it was ending and beginning at the same time. I swallowed hard. I remember thinking you were about to kiss me. He turned, meeting my eyes. I was. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward. It was alive, pulsing, real. I wanted to, he continued, voice low. But then my dad called, yelling about curfew, and I panicked. I didn't even say goodbye. You didn't have to, I said softly. I knew. He looked at me, really looked. I should have been braver. I smiled faintly. We were kids, Charles, scared ones. He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. You haven't changed, you know that? Not sure if that's a good thing. It is, he said quietly. You still have that calm way of making people feel safe. You did it then, and you're doing it now. That caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there, listening to the sound of his breathing, the chirping outside, the faint laughter from inside his house. Eventually, he spoke again. Daniel really likes Max, by the way. He talks about him all the time. Says he's the only one who doesn't make fun of him for being quiet. I smiled. Sounds familiar. He laughed. Guess we both raised shy kids. Maybe that's a good thing, I said. They'll grow up kinder. He nodded. Yeah, maybe they'll do better than we did. The words lingered, heavy with meaning neither of us had to explain. We sat like that for a long time, 2 grown men with shared history, sipping beer under the soft glow of a porch light. It felt easy, and yet my chest ached with everything unspoken. After a while, I stood, brushing off my jeans. I should probably head home. Max is alone. Right, Charles said, standing too. Thanks for the help tonight, and for stopping by. Anytime, I said. As I turned toward my car, he called after me. John. I stopped. He hesitated, then smiled, the same soft, uncertain smile I remembered from that night years ago. It's really good having you back in my life. I swallowed hard. It's good being here. And as I drove away, I caught sight of him in my rearview mirror, standing there under the porch light, watching me leave, just like he had that Halloween night. This time, though, the distance between us didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like waiting. Weeks turned into months, and autumn slowly gave way to winter. The air grew colder, but I found myself looking forward to the evenings more than I ever had. Every Thursday, Charles and I would meet, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just a walk while the boys played in the park. Our conversations started casually, school schedules, work, parenting, but somewhere in between, something began to grow, something fragile, yet warm. It wasn't fireworks or grand gestures. It was smaller than that. A look that lasted too long, a smile that carried meaning, a silence that felt comfortable instead of awkward. I caught myself thinking about him during the quiet moments when I brewed my morning coffee or folded Max's laundry. And every time my phone buzzed with a message from Charles, I'd feel that strange flutter in my chest I hadn't felt since my 20s. Maybe this was what love looked like the second time around. Quieter, steadier, but somehow deeper. One night, after putting Max to bed, I found myself scrolling through old photos our first Halloween together, his first day at school, the day we moved into the house. So much had changed, and yet I still hadn't told him. Charles and I had grown close, too close for me to keep pretending it was just friendship. We hadn't said the words, but it was there, in every small touch and every pause before goodbye. I picked up my phone and texted him, "Can we talk?" His reply came almost instantly. "Of course. Come over." When I arrived, the house was quiet. Daniel had gone to bed. The only light came from the living room lamp, painting everything in a soft gold. Charles was sitting on the couch, his hands clasped. He looked nervous. "I've been thinking about us," I began, sitting beside him. "About what we're doing, or what we're not doing." He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on his hands. "I know. I don't want to keep hiding it, Charles. Not from the boys, not from ourselves." He sighed. "I've been worried about that too, about how Daniel would take it. He's been through so much already with the divorce." "I get that," I said gently. "That's why I haven't told Max yet either. But I don't want to teach him to be afraid of love." Charles looked up then, and something in his eyes softened. "You're braver than I am, John." "No," I said, just tired of losing people because I didn't say what I felt. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the kind of silence that stretched between two hearts trying to decide if they were ready. Finally, I reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold, but they didn't pull away. "Let's give it time," I said quietly. "But not forever." He nodded. "Deal." A week later, over breakfast, I decided it was time. Max sat at the table, eating his cereal, humming a song he must have picked up from school. I waited until he looked up. "Hey, bud," I said softly. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded, spoon halfway to his mouth. "You know Charles, right? Daniel's dad?" "Yeah," he said. "He's nice, and he makes good pancakes." I smiled. "He is nice. And I like him. Not just as a friend." He blinked, thinking for a moment. "Like, you want to be boyfriends?" The word hung in the air. My throat felt tight. "Yeah, something like that." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at his cereal, then back up at me with a calm I didn't expect from a 10-year-old. "Does he make you happy?" he asked. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, he does." He nodded once. "Then I think that's good." Something broke in me then, the quiet kind of breaking that releases more than it hurts. My eyes burned, and I reached out to pull him into a hug. "Thank you, Max," I whispered. He hugged me back, small arms wrapping around my neck. "I just want you to smile more, Dad." And for the first time in a long time, I really did. That evening, I texted Charles, told Max he's okay with it. The reply came a minute later. "That's amazing. I'll talk to Daniel soon." A few days later, he did. He called me that night, his voice soft through the phone. "Daniel took it better than I thought," he said. "As long as I'm happy, he's happy too." I smiled, tears threatening again. "He's a good kid, Charles, just like his dad." There was a pause, the kind of pause that could have been a lifetime. Then he said, "Come over?" When I got there, he was standing at the doorway, wearing a worn, gray sweater and that same uncertain smile he'd always had when words felt too heavy. I stepped inside. Neither of us spoke at first. We didn't need to. The warmth of the room, the sound of the rain outside, the faint hum of the refrigerator, everything felt still. Finally, he said, I told him everything. About how I felt. About you. About us. "And?" I asked. He smiled. Then he said, "It's about time." We both laughed softly. Then the laughter faded, and all that was left was the quiet truth between us. Charles took a step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what happens next, but I want us to have a chance." I nodded, feeling my chest tighten in the best possible way. "So do I." He looked at me for a moment longer the same way he used to back in high school, before everything got complicated, and then, gently, he pulled me into a hug. It wasn't a passionate, movie-style embrace. It was slow, deep, full of unspoken things. A promise, a relief, a homecoming. I buried my face against his shoulder, breathing him in the scent of rain and soap and warmth. He held me just as tightly, like he'd been waiting years for this simple, quiet moment. We didn't need words. Outside, the rain fell harder, tapping against the windows like an old song. Inside, two boys slept soundly, unaware that their fathers were learning to love again carefully, honestly, and without fear. And for the first time since that unfinished night so many years ago, I knew we hadn't missed our chance. We had just been waiting for the right season to begin again. So, thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe and consider making a donation to our channel if you enjoyed this slow burn romance love story. See you soon.